All right. I'm going to go ahead and call to order the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission regular meeting for Wednesday, June 12th at 6:30 p.m. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Would everyone please rise? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If the recording secretary would please call the roll.
Commissioner DeVrint. Here. Commissioner Weeks.
Present.
Thank you. Chair Lubicic.
Present.
Vice Chair Maharo.
Will be absent this evening.
And then Commissioner Urena.
Present.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Tonight's meeting is live streamed on Cable Channel 3 and on our online platforms. To prevent any overlaps in comments, each commissioner will be called upon to speak. The first item on our agenda is public comment. This is the time set aside for members of the public to address the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission on items of interest that are not on the agenda but are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the Commission cannot answer any questions or take any action until such time as the matter may appear as an item on a future agenda. If you wish to address the Commission, please fill out a speaker card that is available on the back table. Once completed, kindly submit the card to the recording secretary. Speakers will be called to the podium one by one. Each speaker will be given up to 3 minutes to speak. Do we have any comments for the public comment?
No public comment at this time.
All right. Then we'll go ahead and move to the second item on the agenda, which is approval of the minutes. These are the minutes from the March 13th, 2024 HP-CRC meeting. Hope everyone's had a chance to review. If so, could I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Would we vote by call? Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner DeVrint.
Yay.
Commissioner Weeks.
Yay.
Chair Lubicic.
Aye.
Vice Chair Maharo is absent. And then Commissioner Urena.
Aye.
All right. 4 ayes. Motion passes.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is our citywide planning case number ZTA 24-002, the zone text amendment, applicant City of San Gabriel. From Sam.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. The slide deck that will be presented before you, the Commission has seen before. The purpose of showing some of the slides again would be to remind the Commission of the purpose and why the city is moving forward with recommending the zone text amendment. Again, the case number is ZTA 24-002, and this item came before the Commission on the March 13th meeting for review and to provide comments for staff to refine the code amendment. So again, the purpose of this code amendment is triggered by the city's application to be a certified local government with the state and the federal government, and the purpose is to establish a partnership with both agencies, also to qualify for federal funding, and to have a preservation program for the city. The requirements to be a CLG is to enforce appropriate regulations as it pertains to preservation, also to establish a commission, which the city has done, to maintain an inventory and to prepare a survey, and also to encourage public participation in a preservation program, and to perform the responsibilities as delegated by the state and the federal government. And so just a quick timeline again, the city's preservation program, again, became quite active starting in 2017. And really throughout these past few years, just all the activities that have taken place to develop the city's preservation program. And the objectives of the proposed code amendments, again, is mainly in response to comments received from the state on the city's CLG application and just areas where the state, also leading to the federal review, felt that the city's preservation ordinance could be improved upon and just refined a little bit more. Particularly to clarify procedures between the three agencies, both the City of San Gabriel, the state, and the federal government. Also to define and to simplify and to make clear the city's own procedures, as well as to separate the review responsibility between the agencies. And again, at the local level, what the City of San Gabriel has is the San Gabriel Register of Cultural Resources. At the state level, the state has the California Register of Historical Resources, and at the national level, the federal government has the National Register of Historic Places. And at a at a lower level would be individual properties that have established Mills Act contracts with the city. And again, specifically, the zone text amendment proposes to add and to delete some definitions, again, to simplify code, remove repetition, to clarify procedures, to designate resources, and to clarify language as it pertains to the Environmental Quality Act. And also to highlight key terms, such as what is a cultural resource, a historical resource, historic landmark, historic district, difference between a conservation overlay zone and a planning district, and then also eventually to get to the point of developing guidelines for design review for those districts. And again, the more important items identified by the state and the federal government, that's just the National Park Service, was the provision in the city's code that referred to automatic nominations, and that was removed in a previous zone text amendment, as well as, again, implications as it relates to the California Environmental Quality Act. And so, as mentioned, the zone text amendment, the draft was brought before the commission at the last meeting on March 13th. The commission provided specific comments, mainly to add page numbers to both the red line version as well as the clean version that was provided to the commission. Also to cross-reference property maintenance relationships to clearly define requirements for properties that have been surveyed and designated versus standard property maintenance. Also, the number of meetings for the commission, and the commission stated that planning district may be more appropriate for non-historic districts, as that was the term that was used in the survey that was conducted for the city. And then also projects within identified planning districts to follow very similar procedures to formal historic districts. And then to clarify that last provision pertaining to violations, that one staff looked into the code section, and that was very specific to signage. So as part of this project, staff will be relocating that code section to the appropriate chapter. And so with that, staff did incorporate the comments provided by the commission, and the recommendation before the commission this evening is for the Historic Preservation Cultural Resource Commission to adopt a resolution, that's a typo, of the Preservation Commission of San Gabriel, recommending approval of the proposed zone text amendment to the City Council, amending Chapter 153 zoning code of the San Gabriel Municipal Code to update the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Ordinance. And this concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I'll start with Commissioner DeVrent.
Yeah, I had just one question, and it was, it's referring to, the cross-referencing I saw was applied at the beginning of this document, but on item 153-613, the duty to maintain and designate cultural resources, that whole section there, my question is this, does this run in parallel, is reflected in the overall city municipal code as well, so that if somebody has a property, maybe they don't know that it's a historical property, that this type of parameters, enforcement procedures are on any type of home in San Gabriel, or are these very specific to historical, is there a higher standard for these historical buildings that were referenced here? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yes, if the cross-reference means to make sure that in the sections that are outside of the preservation ordinance, cross-references that if it is a historical property to refer to the preservation ordinance for procedures.
Okay, and then also, as well as that the items that are listed in these, to maintain and designate cultural resources are also in the municipal code for just any other home that's in the, in San Gabriel, I guess is my question, is that, are there two standards that are being held up for these? Like, if it's a historical property, these are more, that this is a higher standard than somebody who has a home that may be in disrepair or something like that, that is not a historical home, that the municipal code covers both this and that.
Yes, it would be different standards.
Okay, great, thank you.
Commissioner Weeks?
No comments at this time.
Commissioner Urena?
I have no comments.
I am happy with the comments, how they were integrated from our commission, so I don't have any questions or comments on this either. So that brings us to public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item?
No public comment at this time, Madam Chair.
All right, so public comment will close at 6:42. Any last comments before I call for a vote on the resolution? Not seeing any. If I could get a motion to adopt resolution, and Sam, I'm going to assume it's the same number, resolution ZTA 24-002 for the zone text amendment.
I motion.
Thank you. In a second.
Second.
Thank you. Could we have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Durant? Aye. Commissioner Weeks?
Aye.
Thank you. Chair Lubicic?
Aye.
And Commissioner Urena?
Aye.
All right, thank you. 4 ayes, motion passes, or resolution passes.
Thank you. All right, so that brings us to item 4 on the agenda, which is 607 West Roses Road, planning case number GPA 21-001, ZC 21-001, ZTA 21-001, LTLA 21-009. These are general plan amendments, zone change, zone text amendment, and lot line adjustment. Applicant, the San Gabriel Cemetery. And we're going to have a presentation on this item.
Apologies for that. We'll have to go manual for this item. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Oh, boy.
Sorry, my apologies. One moment. There you go, Sam.
There we go. Thank you. So, Madam Chair, members of the commission, the subject property this evening is located on the north side of Roses Road between DeSales Street to the west and Dobbins Drive to the east. We can go to the next slide. Damien, if you can continue to scroll, but essentially this is a closer aerial view of the subject property. You can go to the next one and you can pause here. And so essentially those were aerial views. There was a closer view of the property from the top, and then also some images of the front south elevation as well as the side east elevation of the property, and the staff will be happy to scroll back to those images if the commission needs to refer to those. This slide is the current zoning of the property, which is R1 single family and has a general plan designation of low density residential. The subject site is bordered by single family residences to the east, west, south, and the cemetery use to the north. And the proposed project this evening is to convert the subject property to expand the cemetery use. Next slide, please. The subject property is approximately 25,000 square feet. That's 0.5 acres in size and is currently developed with a 1,900 square feet, one-story, single-family dwelling that was constructed in 1931. The proposed project would demolish the existing single-family house along with the attached garage, again, to expand the cemetery grounds. As mentioned, the property is one-story, Spanish colonial revival style with smooth stucco, low-pitch roof with red Spanish clay tiles, and again, it was in some of the photos that was shown. The property, the existing single-family home, as shown on the site plan, it does show that it is approximately about 184 feet setback from the front property line, and currently the property is screened by mature trees. Next slide. As part of the proposed project, the applicant is proposing to close access to the site, and the property will be accessible from the interior of the cemetery site at the rear. The site is proposed to provide additional room for interment space, headstones, columbarium, and the conceptual layout shows approximately 596 plots that can potentially be provided, along with 10 columbariums that will be approximately 5 feet tall, 7 feet wide, and 2 feet deep. The project also includes other site improvements, such as the installation of a new block wall, landscaping, and signage to accommodate the cemetery use. And any identified oak trees on the property will be protected in place as part of the project. Next slide, please. The applicant has provided some architectural plans and renderings to show some of the concept designs. Damien, if you can continue to scroll. One more. And so the entitlements before the commission this evening, at least to provide a recommendation on, it is a package application, as mentioned, general plan amendment, text amendment, zone change, lot line adjustment. It is subject to the review of the Preservation Commission as well as the Planning Commission, and then finally for determination by the City Council. Next slide. This project history provides a little bit of timeline from submittal to the meeting this evening. It started with the project application submittal, then it went through a staff review. At that time, the project was evaluated for integrity based on its location, the property, historic context, significance, eligibility, and design. The city's architectural historian assisted with this review. And it was recommended that a historical assessment be conducted to determine the association of the project with the cemetery and the church properties, the importance of the architect that designed the residence, and primarily the potential of the property to be within a historic district. The applicant then retained the services of SAFOS to assist with the preparation of a historical resource assessment. Then in September, the project did come before the Preservation Commission for a preview. Following in August, not yet, Damien. Following in August, the applicant team conducted an outreach meeting, sending out notices to the community to provide information on their project. Then in October, the city completed its resource survey. And here we are at the preservation meeting this evening. Next slide, please. And also within that time frame, environmental review was conducted on the project. A notice of preparation was circulated between August and September, followed by the draft environmental review in April through May. And here we are this evening with the draft as well as the final, EIR, not M&D. Next slide, please. So what is before the commission this evening is to review the project for potential eligibility based on the historic resource evaluation and placement on the city's historic resource survey list. Also to consider an option for adaptive reuse, and then also the potential for designation and either certification of demolition or certification of economic hardship. But these are all recommendations. These are not actions and approvals. Eventually, all of that gets forwarded to the City Council if that is the direction of the recommendation of the commission this evening. Next slide, please. The subject property is currently not designated or on a survey. The city's code does outline the process for designating landmarks and districts, and also the process to review projects, resources, and districts that have been designated. And typically that process would be an initial review and then potentially a certificate of demolition. So the projects that have come before this commission, for example, has been the Playhouse Paint Project, since the city's Playhouse is designated, as well as the Columbarium Project that was at the Mission, and then also the arcade building that's adjacent to City Hall and the remodel that occurred to that building. So those are examples of projects proposed for properties that have already been designated. What is different about this application this evening is this project has not yet been designated. It is going through the review process for the commission to consider its eligibility. So the commission's review this evening is to consider whether the property is potentially eligible and meets the national, state, and local criteria for designation. If the commission determines that the property is potentially eligible, then the property will be placed on the city's historic resource survey list, and then the project would follow the process as required for projects on a surveyed list. Again, including consideration for potential designation, certificate of demolition, and a certificate of economic hardship if requested by the applicant. And again, these items are subject to final approval by the City Council. The criteria before you is the criteria that is used to evaluate eligibility. The City of San Gabriel has a similar set of criteria to the state, and essentially it is determined by significant event, significant person, distinctive architectural characteristics, and information on the prehistory and history of the city, region, state, and nation. Next slide, please. The historic resource evaluation report that is included as Appendix B of the EIR concluded that the property is eligible under criteria 3 as an example of architectural style, period, and method of construction. And this is the factor behind the recommendation this evening. If in the case where the commission determines that the property should not be demolished as part of the project, then the commission can provide comments on the potential for adaptive reuse of the property, either in whole or in part. And then as a result of that, the proposed project, the number of plots that can be provided would be substantially less. It was identified by the applicant team as potentially approximately 61 plots as opposed to the proposed 596. Next slide, please. And so this is the analysis that was provided by the applicant team. It was a conversation and discussion that staff did have with the applicant team to consider, and this is something that they put together for the commission to consider. Next slide, please. This meeting was a notice, a meeting noticing requirement for the public hearing as well as for SEQA requirements. Next slide. And so the recommendation before the Preservation Commission this evening, as mentioned, it is a recommendation. It includes certifying the environmental impact report. That's one action, and as mentioned by staff, the recommendation is the denial just based on the findings of the historic resource evaluation. With that, this concludes staff's presentation. The city's architectural historian, Jen, is available this evening for question, as well as myself.
Thank you, Sam. I'll start with commissioner questions. Commissioner DeVrent?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions on the, reviewing both reports. In the historical resources assessment, there was a report by Safros and there was a report by AMS. Both had basically the same findings, I believe. They just came to different conclusions. Is the one by AMS the one that is contained as the one that we should be using as guidance for the environmental impact report?
Yes, I can start, and then Jen can add on to it. So that was a report that was prepared. It was commissioned by the applicant team as part of what was requested by the city, and that was submitted to the city for review. And then the city provided feedback, asking for more resource reference to substantiate the determination, And between the discussions, it was determined that further analysis was needed, and at that point, staff proceeded with the environmental review of the project, and a peer review was conducted by AMS on the report that was prepared by SAFO. So it's a combination of the reports.
Okay. Jen, did you have?
Sure. Yes, thanks. And I just want to, if there's an opportunity to correct, I think it is ASM, just don't want to misstate the name. No, sorry about that.
You're right.
Yeah. So in general, the technical report that's appended to the EIR would go into greater depth than the initial HRER, the Historic Resources Evaluation Report. So you should probably, those still take a look at them in combination, but just know that the second one is to greater detail. I did review both, and then my assessment of the first report and the first level of effort and the methodology and the findings did prompt a higher level of environmental review, leading to the second report and the EIR.
Okay. Okay. So there are a couple of things for me on those reports. And I mean, both reports, there are areas that I agreed with, and, the conclusions, I think, are the things that come out to me the most. Is staff was basically saying that there are extant homes in the area that meet this standard, that are better examples of that type of style that's in the area. And in our inventory, I think I found 3 residential that were caught in our inventory, a couple of that are there. So I find that that there are examples of that, and I don't know whether or not all of the inventories. There are other homes in the area, I think, that aren't caught in this inventory too, that I think meet that standard. So as far as there's not being something in the area that is the same or close to the same or representative of that, I think that there are better examples of that type of home in San Gabriel than this one. This one was not in the original inventory by ARG. Even the historical district designation that's in that area for the Rosemont area ends at Roses Road and doesn't go north of that. I know that it was added in this report that could be extended to capture this. So, and then, also the importance of Ivan Wells is brought up here. I mean, it states clearly in there that he was a prolific builder, which means there are examples, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 examples, just not in San Gabriel, but in Los Angeles, that are captured in a historical district that's in the Midtown area, which are better examples of his architectural style than what's presented here. I know that the integrity of the structure is not always necessarily part of this requirement, but the integrity of this home and the condition that this home is in, based off from the pictures and based off from me touring this, would be a significant cost to mitigate a lot of those problems. And so that's my initial findings on that, or at least my initial thoughts on that. And going into the environmental report here, there's a couple of things I wanted clarification. It's just for me. There are mitigation examples, which are called mitigation measures that are in this report that are on there. There's not really page numbers here, but it's 3-118. It's called mitigation measures, and it's MMCUL1 and MMCUL2, which CUL1 basically, prior to demolition permits being issued, would be a documentation, photographic documentation of this property that would be put on record here and filed here archivally at the Planning Commission, or for people to take a look at. And then the other one, which I wasn't sure, was prior to issuance of certificate of occupancy, which I wanted to get clarification of what that meant, that there would be some type of plaque here. So is this something where you're considering here that if these are the mitigations, that if a demolition was to go forward, that these would be 2 options? Okay, so got that. Then the alternatives are listed, and I think they're listed, I think there's an error on the first page. I think they've got them saying that this is just for reference here. It's saying that alternatives are in section 4.0 at the beginning of this document. Sorry, I don't have without page. I think it's on the second page, and they're actually in 5.0. I just wanted to point that out right there. So the alternatives on this would then be removing down from 500, keeping the property there, taking it from 596 plots that's being presented down to 61. Is that correct? Which we just saw. And then the other one was creating this as a home for workers or a family to live there and everything else like, and to that extent, which already exists on the property. There's already a home there. So I don't feel alternative 2 is really a reasonable, reasonable alternative. I feel alternative 1 is a significant reduction of what is proposed there. I don't feel like if you're proposing 596 plots and then reducing it down to 61, I don't feel that that's really a logical alternative based on that. So I'm just going through I've got a lot of tabs here on this. So those are kind of my thoughts on this. I also, when I interviewed for this job, the question that always came up is if something comes before you, and it's a redevelopment of a property or something like that, are you against development? And my answer to that is always no, if it's reasonable development. If something is being removed and something is coming back in that is reasonable, I always feel that that's where we should be looking at, what we should be looking at. The cemetery is captured in this inventory as a potentially historical area. This house wasn't, right? The cemetery in itself is part of the neighborhood that is visited by a lot of the community, and it has a very special place as far as history of the city. With the amount of people, you just go to their website and it lists who was there. Laura Scudder, for one, a female innovator and entrepreneur. Van Nuys, there was railroad barons, gold barons, oil barons. I mean, it is just, all you have to do is go there, look at one of those markers and take a look, and you got a history lesson right there. Excuse me. I think as we're looking at this, as far as properties in the city of San Gabriel, and though I feel that there are some architectural uniqueness to it, most of them are in the interior, in my opinion. There are some really great pieces in there that I thought were really impressive. But the owner or the property owners would not be required to maintain any of the interior portions of this property to that standard anyways. So as far as I'm concerned, what is being replaced is something of an extension of already a historical property in the area that is a key anchor to history in this city. I believe that there are examples of that style of architecture in this city, San Gabriel, and then for Ivan Wells, if people were interested in him as a builder, or if he was an architect at that time, they have examples of that to go to. And so I just find that whether or not we have to, that criteria is something that is actually going to, hold on this just because of the state of repair that it's in and the amount of money and requirements to get it up to a standard, and then the impact that it has on the original proposal, I feel are questions before us here that I would have to say make this not necessarily an alternative to what is going to be proposed and what's going to be in the neighborhood forever. And I think that what they've proposed here and what it's going to look like and have a memorial garden there is something that the neighborhood and the neighbors would appreciate. So I haven't heard comments on that, so I'm not 100% sure what that is. But that's kind of my assessment of looking at this, and that's it. I don't think I'll say any more.
Thank you. Commissioner Weeks?
Okay, how do you follow that? I think I have similar feelings and maybe looking at it big picture. The house, the structure, great example of 1930s construction, architecture. But I think it's a little outweighed by the growth that we need for the enlargement of the cemetery. And I hate to, I'm kind of divided here because I kind of respect the house. I was walking it the last couple of days just to get a feel for that area. And it is a little jewel, inside and out. I mean, you know, tile roof, the round windows, you don't see that anywhere. And there are other examples of that type of architecture, but we have one here now, right? But again, I think that need for the growth of that cemetery is probably going to outweigh that. I did drive that route around the cemetery as well and looked at some of the names that are on the stones, and yeah, there's quite a historical aspect to that area as well. It's a tough call, but I think right now my direction is probably the growth of the cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Weeks, Commissioner Urena.
I think my fellow commissioners have probably expressed a lot of my same ideas. My only question was, is we only have the two options. Was there ever any idea of maybe what the potential repurposing other than living quarters or whatnot? Like, would there have been a way to keep some form of the structure there as maybe, I don't know. I understand that with the maintaining the house there, it basically eliminated the majority of the proposed cemetery area on the back end, right? But was that just due based on the buffer zone needed and maybe the accessible areas along the side of it to access that other end of it? And would there have been a way to remove or maybe modify the garage space or that rumpus room, whatnot, to allow access and still accommodate the other options, right? To still create cemetery plots on that side that's here that's considered non-accessible. That was my only thinking of this, but I do understand the need, and it's kind of hard to weigh what is more historical than the other, right? When this whole commission was set up for trying to maintain and, you know, keep the little jewels that we have in this city, but I was hard pressed to really put my finger on deciding on one or the other without trying to see if there was an alternative to preserve part of the structure, you know, and still allow for additional cemeteries in the inaccessible area. Yeah, that's all.
Yes, Commissioner, we can hold on responding to that. The applicant team is available. They do have their presentation as part of the public comment period. So maybe that's an item that they can address and provide more information to this commission on other design options.
Commissioner Urena, did you have other questions? Is that it?
No, that's all. Thank you.
All right. I have several questions that I'd like to ask, and I wondered if maybe for the benefit of the commission, I've heard a couple questions around what the certificates mean. So to have maybe a better explanation of what a certificate of occupancy means, the certificate of demolition and certificate of hardship would be helpful.
So again, I can start. References to certificate of occupancy, if this is within the EIR and the mitigation measures, this would be at the completion of the proposed project. That includes the demolition, then that would trigger the mitigation measures and the requirements for the plaques and the placement, those requirements. Certificate of demolition and economic hardship is if the commission decides this evening to to determine that there is potential eligibility for the property first to be listed, then potentially to be designated, then it would follow that process of review. And then at that point in time, it would follow the procedure for reviewing the property for the city council to determine whether the property should be demolished under certificate of demolition. And then if the applicant team chooses to make an application for a certificate of economic hardship, then through a pro forma, they would provide this information to the commission, to the city council to consider that there is an economic hardship associated with the project for a full demolition. And I don't know if Jen has anything else to add to that.
Sure, and I did sense several questions in the comments, so I just jotted some notes. So I think to add to what Samantha was offering in the case report and then also in this follow-up is the need to separate the decision here between eligibility and then the project. And I know that's difficult when both have been presented together. And so really the first question is, do you concur with the findings in the ASM report or the collective total of the case, record that you have before you? And certainly among the applicant team, I'm sure they have representation to speak to you about their findings. And so that's the first step, really. And then the answer to that does then dictate which path the project takes from there. So, and then regarding the criteria and eligibility, I just would like to point out that neither in the state criteria or the local criteria for which the property is eligible for, under both, does it require a property to be the first, only, last, best, those types of things. So those aren't considerations when a property is, evaluated. Something to remember on that. Alternative options, again, that would be something to discuss if your review goes one particular path based on the first decision. But certainly that would be something that you could discuss and consider in your recommendation to council if the project review did go to that path.
Thank you. The other question I had really concerns the discussion around the rumpus room that was added and just other elements over time. The house has been there since 1931. So I'm assuming that the rumpus room is a reversible addition.
I would love when the project team does present to have that question answered a little bit more fully by the consultant team, but my understanding is that it's fairly reversible, and in fact, from my reading of the report, I thought it was interesting that Ivan Wells had also designed other rumpus rooms for other properties, and so that was kind of interesting that it turned out to be a rumpus room here. But yes, I think that was a porch enclosure and to the rear or to the side, and it's fairly reversible. However, being on the rear or side, I can't quite recall. It's also in a area that's less primary, less seen. If we were to have a new project come before us today where someone wanted to enclose a porch and make it a rumpus room, something you would consider is this on the front of the house? Is it on the side? Is it towards the rear or in the back? Under the Secretary of the Interior standards, it's the location that's most preferable for a modification like that. So the importance of that modification is minimal.
All right, and then another question I had concerns adaptive reuse, and in particular, while a lot of the building features spoke to the exterior in terms of the style, there was also discussion of some of the interior characteristics. And so I'm wondering if, as we consider eligibility, are we speaking to what is visible from the street in the exterior, or are we actually calling out and speaking to interior features as well?
That's a great question. Generally, with any public historic preservation program, the exteriors are of primary importance because that's what's visible to the public view. But in the zoning code, there is consideration for interior features if they're specifically called out as part of the eligibility. And and brought forward with the designation package. So I suppose to the extent that the interior features were included in the recommendation of eligibility, and again, the consultant who is part of the project team can speak more to that. But to the extent that that was included, then yes, you would consider those as part of the eligibility of the property.
All right, and then I had sent a question earlier, but I would love to get still a more understanding of Ivan Wells, particularly because we're considering this under criterion 3. As Commissioner DeVrint said, he's recognized multiple times in the document as being a prolific builder. And I had inquired if any of his other works, and you had given me an answer about, I think I'm more accustomed to hearing maybe a master architect or sort of the canon of architecture as opposed to that of builders. So maybe for the benefit of my fellow commissioners, a little discussion of how a builder's mastery is determined. And I'll maybe pause there because I've got a couple questions in that line.
Sure. Yes, there's no, real strict guidelines on, how you determine that. Of course, it's weighted by the extent of experience of someone who is evaluating this. I mean, the project consultant, myself, someone who is qualified under the Secretary of the Interior Standards and who's been experienced and done reviews like this for a number of years, we are able to not just compare a builder or an architect or even an engineer. There's multiple categories there, or an artisan or craftsman. We don't just compare them to themselves, but our own understanding and the knowledge of the field. So prolific is an interesting thing. Someone has to be prolific in order to have made their mark and demonstrated their skill and their desirability for someone to hire them. But then I suppose the same argument can be made to say, well, they're everywhere. We have so many. But again, because something is one of many or one of the last or one of the first, doesn't matter under the local criteria or the state. So one of the measures for me for a builder or an architect or an engineer was this professional admired and revered and recognized for their ability in their own time, and how did that take shape and how did that form? And so for this builder, he is noted in several publications and many newspaper articles that in fact the first Historic Resources report failed to find, but the report by ASM did find and found compelling. And he's also in Architectural Digest multiple times. And noted among those articles are his innovations in building and construction and design. He isn't an architect, but he could have been. He's considered like a designer builder. And of course, you can even have an unknown builder under that criteria for the California Register. You can even not know who the builder is, but be able to determine from the quality of their work and in relation to the other known works that you can determine a builder, a master builder, even if you don't know who the builder is.
Okay. And then I had asked, sort of in that vein, if we knew of any other constructions or structures that had been nominated or designated. And so I was given the Carthay Neighborhoods Historic District. And I suppose my question there, it's a very different neighborhood feel than the setting of this particular structure in San Gabriel, where ours is very set back from the street and sort of hidden by the overgrowth. The Carthay Neighborhoods Historic District really has much more what I would call sort of the suburban feel of houses that are closer to the sidewalk and more clearly visible, speaking to each other. In that neighborhoods district, he wasn't called out as one of the builders of note in the narrative, but he was identified as a builder on the properties themselves. And so I guess my question is, understanding what we would have as a standalone structure versus the feel that his style gives to a coherent district, if you could help me navigate that difference.
Right, these are two different properties. So the, one of the historic districts that he has a presence in that is, I believe it was designated to the national, listed in the National Register, not just found eligible, but regardless, it's the same distinction. That is a district, and so I can't quite recall how many properties. Perhaps the consultant team can fill in the blank on that. I'm not sure if it's hundreds, but the point of this is that contributors to a district really have a lower threshold of eligibility because they rely on each other in order to collectively have the property rise to the level of eligible and designatable. So with an individually eligible property, that's quite different. It has to stand alone, you know, in its eligibility. And in this case, it was found eligible at the local level and the state level. For the district, also, when you're dealing with many, many properties within a nomination application for the National Register, you don't go into quite the same level of depth when you're discussing individual properties or individual builders or even individual property owners, that type of thing. I don't find it totally significant that he wasn't singled out in the narrative so much that as he was, the houses that he designed were included. They certainly were found to rise to the level of a contributor. But again, that is a lower threshold. So looking at that designation, lower threshold for a contributor, yet it's eligible for the National Register. In this case, we have an individual property eligible at the local and state level. So.
All right, thank you. Are there other questions from my commissioners? Commissioner DeVrent?
So what are we to consider today? What is the points that we need to consider tonight based off from for eligibility? What are our guideposts for eligibility standards that we should be considering tonight?
Well, yes, as that is the first task at hand. You know, you would consider the if I was reviewing the full case history, I'd be considering the methodology and findings in the first report. It was appended to the report by ASM, and the methodology findings and findings in the ASM report, and reviewing whether or not you feel the information that was brought to light by that report and the findings that were made were consistent with the criteria that are in our local ordinance and in the state criteria for listing in the national, or excuse me, the California Register. And if so, then you would concur with those findings and find that the property is eligible for designation. If not, then it would not be considered eligible by the city of St. Gabriel and not listed in the inventory. And then Sam can probably speak to more as to remind us all again as to which path the project goes from there.
Yes, but before, again, what the commission is considering is whether the project is eligible based on, in association with a significant event, a person, architectural characteristic, and information to the prehistory and history of the region, the state, and the national level. If, again, the commission decides that the property is eligible, then it would go on the city survey list, and then it would follow the review procedures as required. The commission can consider moving forward with recommending designation if it decides at that stage. And then if that is the case, that is what is forwarded to the city council for consideration. But those are obvious, very different paths between the project that is proposed and the alternative path.
And Jennifer, you had mentioned last remaining or best example. Can you explain that to me?
Sure. Yes. So there's our local criteria aside, at the state level and the national level, the National Register and the California Register criteria, they don't include the requirement that a property is the first, last, best, only of its kind, or of you know, in what a particular area of significance. But there are categories that do include that. So California landmark and national landmark, those categories of designation do include those criteria. So those are very much higher levels to achieve. And so it's just significant that those are included in a part for a particular level, and they just aren't included in the registers. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, and so this one being that it wouldn't be the last, possibly not the best or only, that is, because there are examples in this Carthay neighborhood and everything else, that's something we consider in this situation, or should we consider?
It doesn't have to meet the requirement that it's the first, last, best, or only in order to be eligible under the criteria that have been identified for the California Register or for the local register.
Okay.
All right, so I'll turn now to public comment on the item. And I'm assuming we have some.
One moment, sorry. Can you hear me? And do I have to say next slide, please? Yes. All right, sorry. All right, hi, I'm John Babcock. I'm the chair of the board of the San Gabriel Cemetery. My wife has told me that nothing makes people try to get away from you faster at a party than saying you're on the board of a cemetery and you want to talk to them about it. So I hope you will forgive me if I talk to you briefly about cemeteries in general. And then this one, I think you know the cemetery is a small nonprofit cemetery on Roses Road. I was asked to join the board of the cemetery in 2002, and I didn't, and I agreed, and I didn't know anything about the cemetery business. I tried to learn all I could, and I got myself introduced to a guy named Russ Wittenberg. He's the CFO of Forest Lawn, and sort of a leader in the industry. Nominally, we and Russ were competitors, except we sell about $500,000 a year, and Russ sells about $100 million. And so while Russ might have been a little worried about me as a competitor, he was more worried about us becoming a failed cemetery. There are many failed cemeteries with weeds and crumbling roads and insufficient endowments, and you see them. And in their failure of care, they diminish the people who are buried there, and they diminish the neighborhoods in which they reside. And so Russ took 4 hours to educate me, a stranger, on the cemetery business, on the hopes that San Gabriel Cemetery would not become a failed cemetery. Next slide. So I'll try to summarize the lesson for you. Cemeteries sell burial space, and they set aside a portion of each sale for their endowment. And the point of that is that when you sell your last space, you have enough in your endowment to keep the lawn mowed forever. We are in the forever business, and that's the promise we keep, we make to the people who are buried there. And then, like saving for your retirement, it won't surprise you to know a lot of cemeteries don't do it well. Because when you're selling, you're getting the revenue every year, and the problems don't show up. And so there's a temptation to not get there. And so Russ tells me that they like to be 100% endowed when they are 80% sold. So I go home and I try to figure out where we are, and it is bad. Actually, next slide, almost as bad as the vintage 2002 PowerPoint I am going to show you. I pulled this off an old computer on Monday. Next slide. In short, I thought we were 40% endowed and 97% sold. Next slide. In 130 years, we had built up an endowment of $2.1 million, and I estimated that we needed to more than double that to $5 million. Quickly. In fact, I was wrong. I still didn't know the industry, and in fact, the target number was $14 million. And so how could we do there? Next slide, more vintage PowerPoint. We did everything on this list. All dials turned to 10. We substantially increased our prices. We tripled the amount we gave to the endowment. We expanded new spaces. Next slide. And we've taken roads on the cemetery and closed them and converted them to new burial space. Next slide. That's these yellow areas and some areas that we didn't anticipate back then. And so now some people, when they go to see their loved ones, they used to drive up to the burial space, and now they have to get out and walk a bit. But it allowed us to expand the burial space and to increase the endowment. And we've added columbariums, those niches where you put in ashes. And in fact, we've increased the endowment to $7 million. But even with all that, it was always sort of too much of a long shot, too little, too late. But even in 2002, there was literally one property that offered the opportunity to expand and to both fully endow the cemetery and to serve the community for decades. 607 Roses Road, that blue box. There is no other cemetery-adjacent property like it. Along our east, west, and north property lines are residences, and we are not going to propose tearing down a home and putting grave sites between two homes. 607 sits with the cemetery to the north and church property to the east and west of it. And the church has been very supportive of our expansion into 607. So we talked to the owner of 607, but he wasn't interested in selling at the time, and so we watched and waited for 18 years. And it became available for sale just before Halloween of 2020. 3 days later, we made a full price, no contingencies offer of $1.2 million. I am sure we overpaid as a residence, but it was an opportunity. It was the opportunity to truly secure the perpetual future of the cemetery, and we took it. And I was elated. Since then, we've been moving through the city process. As you've seen, we are not real estate developers. We are volunteers, and so it's been slow. And Sam and her staff has been helpful, and we've been trying to dot our I's and cross our T's. Next slide. The cemetery is 152 years old. It's the birthplace of Don Benito Wilson and the Kecks and Pattons and Laura Scudder and Miriam Wee, and you can all read the Wikipedia page. But for all that history, it still needs to continue to serve the community, and I was concerned that our neighbors wouldn't want more cemetery property. And so we've gone out into some open houses and talked to people what we were proposing, and we were met with great support, and it's been heartening. Next slide. So on Saturday, I was shocked to read the staff report recommending denial of the project. Though to be fair, the staff was asked if it would reduce a historic resource, and it would. It's an example, as you've heard, of a Spanish colonial revival home with an attached garage. The report further describes it as in poor condition, deeply set back, and not visible from the street, but it does have historic value. Next slide. Keeping the house is mutually exclusive with developing it as a cemetery property. In practical terms, it blocks tractor ingress. But in more fundamental human ways, it prevents the area from being the sacred place where people in our community are going to grieve. And the notion that we would keep this structure and we would tell people to bury their loved ones in front of a garage door is insulting. For 22 years, I have volunteered to improve the cemetery and to serve this community, and it is not glamorous work, and I'm proud of how well this cemetery serves people on some of the most difficult days in their lives. It is a cultural and community treasure, and we have an opportunity to protect it in perpetuity. So I will ask that you acknowledge that there is some historic value in the house at 607 Roses Road, which we hope to capture, curate, and memorialize for generations who are interested in seeing the structure that was sacrificed for the future of the cemetery. And I'll also ask that you look at it and weigh the historic and cultural cost and benefits to this community, and then use your discretion and judgment as a commission to recommend approval of this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess, do you have any questions, or? Someone
Feel
asked
free
about.
to ask questions. Okay. Are there any questions from the commission for Mr. Babcock?
So, you know what? I think you did answer all of those in your presentation, so I don't have any questions at this time. Maybe
Okay. I guess there was sort of an earlier question on the mitigating factors, and there were or mitigating measures, and there are two. And the first was to document the history, which has now been done at some depth, and then photographically record the property. I'll say we're sort of delighted to do both of those, both making a copy here for the Planning Commission and the library, and we would want it for our own history. And I hope it's obvious to you, we're really proud of our history, and this house is now part of the history of the San Gabriel Cemetery. And the second measure was a bronze plaque describing the building and the builder, Ivan Wells, and I think that's both important and appropriate. Cemeteries are places of deep meaning. And so to tell families about the place and what was here before isn't a burden, it's a privilege and an obligation. So that, I guess, to the extent there's a question about that, I think those are things you would want to do to tell about the place.
Thank you.
Right. So the property to the west and to the east that borders this, you said they are owned by the church at this point.
Yeah.
So, and I understand, like, in 20 years, there's a cemetery there, somebody goes and buys the house to the left or to the right, after this, if the church decides they need to make a profit at some point on those, the cemetery will be already there. So, there was one part on the design, and I noticed that on the one side, the side that to the house to the west was a wrought iron fence that was going to go along that property in your design. So it would be to the, if I'm looking at the design right, it was a wrought iron fence that would be covered with ivy, correct?
Between us and the parking lot of the church.
Okay, so that's between the house and the parking,
Yeah.
not the house that's that is west, the white Spanish
Right.
revival, not
Right.
that. Okay.
And I can't remember if we plan to expand that to a stone wall. Sorry, the city required a wrought iron fence, which is why we had it proposed that way. But yeah, no, there is the church is a natural one. No one really wants to, and so also the, if it was here, which I'm suggesting it not be, it is behind a 6-foot fence. You know, if you've been down Roses Road and there's a 6-foot stone wall, and this would extend that wall, and so the house would be invisible. And I guess, actually, I think to what Jennifer was saying, the back of the house is how people would approach it, right? Because it's there. And so when they approach it in the cemetery, what they would see is the rumpus room.
I guess my concern would be to somebody who, I think the address, I'm not sure what the address is next door to the west there. If somebody bought that property at some time, there would be a wrought iron fence there that they could see through to the cemetery, and that might be a deterrent to that property's value at some point. You know, if it wasn't a stone wall or brick wall or something like that, that would make.
Yeah, and I don't know, I mean, so we have, I think, chain link mostly, and then a century of ivy.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and I guess it's just worth saying, on both sides of that, no one in the neighborhood wants to see a cemetery, and no one who's grieving wants to see neighbors. And so I guess I don't know what our ability to put up fences that hide it are, but I will say it would be our enthusiasm to do that for people on both sides of the fence. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Commissioner Weeks, did you have any questions or comments on this?
All right. Thanks.
Commissioner Dana? No?
Just a question, so the code issue, if the coding or the rezoning of the property were to be changed, would that be able to allow them to make those changes to the fence line? Is that also, even if it's used as the, how should I explain it? The public use, right, to switch it over? Does that still have to, they still have to abide by the ordinances to have a wrought iron fence? And then ivy as a way to have a buffer so that the general public or the residents can't look in, or vice versa? Or is there any way for them to actually get something that's a little bit more discreet for them on that backside where the property is?
Was the discussion on the fencing along the west property line? Oh, it's the west property line. So whatever the city's fencing regulations would be for that, it would not change ownership of the fence wall. It would be within the project site.
Okay.
All right, do we have additional public comment?
Yes, ma'am, there is public comments. Vicky Zwart has sent in public comment. She would like the commission to know that she agrees that the cemetery should expand and demolish the house at 607 West Roses Road. She has reviewed the expansion plans and believes it would be an improvement over the current state of the property. Pam Riley has submitted a public comment, and that is in support. She supports the demolition of the existing structure and permission for the cemetery to proceed with their plans without further delay. There has been another comment submitted by Mercy Shaw. Her comment is as followed. A few neighbors and I attended the open house at the San Gabriel Cemetery last year. We saw their plans and renderings, which were impressive, beautiful, and a very big improvement from what the property looks like now. Recently, I walked up close to the house and checked photos of the property online. Odd structures and enclosures have been added to the original house, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was a major structural damage for decades of neglect. There are fine examples of Spanish Revival-style homes in the neighborhood that are maintained. The home at 607 West Roses Road is not one of them. The property has been an eyesore before I became an owner on Duane Avenue over 11 years ago. Any architectural significance has been destroyed. There is nothing of value to be saved at this property, and I would be glad to see it cleared and the cemetery carry out their wonderful plans without further delay. One more public comment was submitted by Lori Wheeler. The San Gabriel Cemetery is the final resting place for generations of San Gabriel Valley individuals, a place to honor their memories, providing solace and to grieving families. In that city has a marked lack of green space. The cemetery is a peaceful space where residents and visitors find a place for reflection and contemplation. Expanding the cemetery grounds will provide a local community-based option for future generations to lay their loved ones to rest rather than some of the larger and more commercial options. The existing structure has been neglected for decades and is now extremely dilapidated, requiring extensive and expensive repairs just to make it inhabitable. Undergoing a historical restoration will add to the cost and will, with the extreme disrepair of many of the original features, may be next to impossible. I fully support the cemetery's proposal. It has been thoughtfully and carefully developed to respect and reflect the neighborhood's current architecture and history. That was the only comments we had submitted. I'm not sure if there's any other from the crowd. I do. I wish to see. There's a public card up there if you'd like to fill out. I filled one out. Thank you.
Good evening, members of the commission and the architectural historian. My name is Gene Wu. I live on the 400 block of Duane Avenue in the middle, which is the closest street south of the house. I've heard a lot of discussion here, and I have some comments. I've heard the historians say that repeatedly that the state and local criteria for designation of a historically valuable house or property does not have to be best later or best last or only, but I think the commission should certainly take those into account. Certainly, if this was the best example or the only example of Ivan Wells, that would weigh more heavily into that consideration, but it is none of those things. And as other people have pointed out, this house is significantly set back. I mean, I've lived there for 10 years. I didn't know this house, frankly, really existed until the open house by the good folks at the cemetery. I just thought it was kind of a storage shed. It's very difficult to see from the front. So whatever architectural value still remains, which I'm doubtful, cannot be enjoyed easily. In fact, the only way it can be enjoyed is, frankly, by legal trespass of somebody walking onto private property. I'm an attorney, so these sort of things blow at me. I also want to say, while historic preservation is fine in the abstract, there are practical harms that I don't think have been taken into consideration. As a member of the community, a nearby resident, I mean, this house is ripe for squatters and homeless people to move in because it's so concealed. People can squirrel in there and live for a week. or a month without people really noticing. Given its dilapidated state, it's very possible that people can wander in and get injured. There's a elementary school just down the road, Coolidge Elementary, that my son goes to. There's a preschool across the driveway, not too far from this property. You know, kids are curious creatures, and they may just wander in and see what's inside, and the roof falls down and somebody gets injured. Now, normally the property owners would be liable in such a case, but if the city is the one who compels them to keep this standing, I'm sure some creative plaintiff's lawyer can tag the city for a multi-million-dollar judgment, which none of us as taxpayers would want. And of course, there's a human cost to the injury. Lastly, I can't help but see headlines about forest fires in Canada. And while we've been lucky, there's been a lot of rain this past year. There's going to be drought in Southern California. And if this property stays standing in the next few years, you know, if somebody moves in, squatters sets fire to it, there are so many trees there in a dry year, it could really spark a large forest fire in my neighborhood. And I'm sure nobody wants to see that. Part of the beauty of this neighborhood is that there's a lot of trees, which would be preserved, as I heard, as part of the cemetery expansion. But if just keeping that structure there I think would not be desirable for the neighborhood. And finally, I like the idea of a historic plaque, an explainer. I don't believe they've mentioned it, but there is some sort of a similar plaque and explainer to General Patton on the church side of the cemetery, the little statue of him explaining his role in World War II and his history here. Certainly, I feel that would be in keeping and appropriate. And really, if the staff and the city feel so strongly about the architectural value of this house and its exterior, the city can simply, you know, disassemble it and reassemble it in a more visible area like Smith Park, where more people can enjoy it and view it without trespassing on private property. So for all those reasons, I think the commission should vote in favor of the cemetery expansion. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further comments?
Hi, my name is Madeline Gonzalez. I am an architectural historian, and I'm the one who did the research and the evaluation for this property. And while I actually agree with a lot of what is said, I actually just would like just to say for the record, when I was reviewing the research and the photographs, I really was on the fence about what would elevate it to be eligible. And in the end, what elevates it is actually its incredibly high integrity. A lot of people can conflate integrity with the condition that the building is in. And actually, sometimes when properties have been abandoned for periods of time, it actually managed to retain integrity because all of these original features haven't been altered. So when we look at this house, we see, oh, the original port windows on the side, the shed roof, the interior hand-painted design, the original garage door, the original hardwood floors with peg and groove flooring. Even the rumpus room addition, it is an enclosed space. So it was originally a porch, and then in the 50s, they enclosed it to what it is today. So that would be a very easily reversible thing, I think, in the end. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of put that out there again. We did find it eligible for a reason, and I know a lot of people don't know this, like integrity and considerations and stuff like that, but I just wanted to put that out there again. And also, if anybody has any questions for me about anything else considering integrity or Ivan Wells or anything like that, I can answer any of those questions right now.
Commissioner Weeks?
I have a couple, thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
explanation. That makes a lot of sense. You had mentioned the garage door, which I'm assuming it's original, and that goes towards the criteria of the integrity. I was a Jane's Cottage owner in Altadena. I don't know if you are familiar with Jane's Cottage. My wife and I were. It is a home of somebody in the Altadena area who has it through Pasadena. And so this conversation, to me, the conversation that's being had here on historical homes is not lost on me by any means. But when you mentioned the garage door, I feel like, we had that Jade's Cottage with the barn door open, and we kept them because we loved them, but they were completely impractical and they were rotted and everything else. And, they just kind of I feel like these, when we're talking about integrity, I get that. And I just feel like there's something to be said about all the comments that have been made here today, too.
Yeah, I completely agree with that as
Right,
well.
and
Yeah.
it's the cost of maintaining that garage door.
Yeah.
For if the cemetery decides to sell it to another person, right? That kick in $500,000 just to get started at the home, right? And that's where historical preservation, as much as I love it, and where practicality and cost I start to debate these, because there's a practicality that has to happen.
Of course,
For these buyers, for a potential buyer who's coming in. And this has been a learning lesson for me. This has been great to learn all of these things. But, one comment that I say, and we have it right in the code that we were writing, about keeping the integrity of these homes and making sure that this doesn't happen to a house so that we don't have these conversations. Because I guarantee you that if the city and everybody else was following the municipal codes and was saying, this is sagging, this is rotted, you can't live, these sorts of things, we wouldn't be having these conversations, and the cemetery may not have bought that house for this because the integrity of the house altogether would have been in place, right? So that's where I kind of debate these things, and I feel like you probably feel the same way.
Yeah.
You have a passion towards your craft and your schooling and everything like that, but I feel that we have to weigh all those options when we make these determinations
No,
too.
of course,
And
yeah.
So I appreciate your comments. It helps me think about
Yeah,
these.
like I said, I just wanted to put that out there. And I forgot to mention too, with Ivan Wells, when we were reviewing his scope of work across the entire city, we looked at a lot of different examples of his houses. And this is one, I think the only one that I saw that actually retained a lot of the character defining features that are important to his craft. So like the shed roof and the doors the windows, and the fact that none of the windows have been replaced. There's no obvious additions. There's no new siding. It was actually a very a good example of his work, despite the fact that he has so many examples in both San Gabriel and in the city of Los Angeles.
Can I have a follow-up question? So you mentioned that it has the original windows.
Yes.
And the garage door and all of those.
Yeah.
There's nobody that would go into that house today and keep those original.
Yeah.
So your assessment, and this is a question, your assessment is that goes towards the integrity of his style, right?
Yes.
Of what he did. But the minute somebody purchases his house, those are all gone, right? If they're, I have double hung windows all throughout my house. I'll keep them until the day I can't do it, right?
Yeah.
Originals. But, so my question is, when you look at that goes towards the integrity of the home, that shows the style. But then how do you weigh as a architectural historian, somebody coming into that property and it's going to change all of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I just brought those out because those are incredibly rare things to still have in these homes. A lot of them have been replaced for decades now. The replacements are considered historic. What really elevates this is that with the windows and the garage door and that all I meant on everything that I mentioned, it also has integrity in just in its general unchangeable layout. The, like, nothing inside has really been changed. They still have the original alcove, like, shelving, the original fireplace, the original, like, wooden, whatever these are called, it's escaping me, but and hand painted too. And so, like, I feel like a lot of the photos that we're seeing aren't representative of the, of what is there, still there inside. So it's both, you know, like if somebody came in and bought it and they replaced all the windows and they replaced the garage door and they redid the roofing and they redid the siding, it would lose integrity, but the core of what makes it historically important to Ivan Wells would be retained. And also the San Gabriel historic context, the criteria for the Spanish colonial arrival, even if those all changed, it would still check all of those boxes except for the tower criteria in the local context.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Are there any other follow-up questions? I would actually really appreciate hearing a little bit more of what you learned about Ivan Wells, because that has been kind of my sticking point in understanding his builders. So when you're talking about that style, in our genesis as a commission, it took us a while to get going, and so getting our context statement and then our inventory has taken a while. And I think many of us have felt like we lost a lot of gems waiting for those to be done. And so having them as guiding tools has been helpful. At the same time, reading criterion like about this particular style, and I was going to joke with my commissioners, we all better schedule our walks so we don't violate Brown Act. It sounds like we've all been walking around this property trying to get a sense of the setting and feel. But I also feel like we see examples of this style of architecture throughout the city, and given the emphasis on San Gabriel as the birthplace of Los Angeles and our ties to the Spanish fantasy past, those are styles that are very popular throughout the neighborhoods. And so I think I'm trying to understand the features that differentiate an Ivan Wells construction from those that we might see just around the corner, maybe on Chelsea Place.
Yeah, of course. So Ivan Wells was from LA, and he started his career in the 19-teens. Around the 20s and the 30s, he started building these one-story Spanish colonial revival homes. And what you see in his work is actually was very innovative in the early 1930s, in the sense that the 1920s, of course, was all about, you know, grand Spanish colonial revivals, and those are kind of what we see below Roses, like the 2 stories, the ones with the towers, the like really elaborate entrances, or like the curbed like door frames. Those are kind of what we are familiar with in the 20s. And what Ivan Wells did was, during the Depression in the 30s, he decided to start making what were once seen as these like bigger, luxurious homes into a more affordable, 1-story wide space. So part of like when I was doing the research and I was looking through all these newspaper articles that were talking about his work, they were always calling him innovative because of the way that he utilized the space of the property to kind of make what is a modest home look a little grander, a little bigger. And so it's kind of hard to see in this photo here, but on the left there's a shed roof, and that really adds to kind of that visual, I don't know, just like pyramidic almost structure of a wide house, but in a smaller space. And so if you're looking through San Gabriel, or you're looking through other parts of the city, as Jennifer mentioned before, there's this kind of visual guide you can see sometimes with builders. They have unique marks, they have these unique things that they do, and with Ivan Wells, that's kind of his unique marker. While there are plenty of examples of Spanish colonial revival, and there are plenty of examples of these 1-story homes, it, like, once I got more familiar with his work, once I started looking at, I don't know, like 10 to 15 houses that he built, I started recognizing these unique features in the shed roofing, in this kind of innovation that they kept talking about in the newspapers at the time, of these long types, these interior features, these like specifically the they're called like port windows, the circular windows there. So yeah, so you know, it's kind of like, because he was so prolific, it's easy to see these types of buildings all over the city. But as I mentioned before, This one stands out because it is so unaltered, and that's kind of where we really can see into like what his design was, what his vision was, and like what he was creating 90 years ago that kind of can continue through to the day without the alterations or the additions that you see on other houses that have been altered since. I hope that answers your question. I think I went a little.
No, very well, thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Anything else from the commission? Thank you very much for your comment.
Okay, of course, yeah, thank you.
Are there any other comments? If not, is it all right, as we discussed as a commission, if we were to call people back up to answer any questions we have, or
Yes, if
any
the,
particular?
if the commission decides to do that, if we can consolidate the questions if possible, and then that way they can be addressed at one go, reopening the public hearing and asking the questions and then closing the public.
Okay. So then would it just be better to keep public comment open and discuss?
To keep public
But
comment.
I will not close public comment. I'll keep it open because I do have questions. I'm trying to hold two things kind of in my head right now, and one is the question of eligibility, and then the other is the question of the project. And I don't know, Mr. Babcock, if you can answer the questions for me, but I was struck in reading the reduction in plots that the proposals for mediation would bring. So going from 569 to 61, and I can only imagine that that's a tremendous financial impact, and I was wondering if you can speak to what that is?
Yeah, actually, that's right. That's right. I didn't talk about. I said that we overpaid at $1.2 million as a residence, and that's true. As burial space, it's probably worth $16 million. It is incredible. It was worth waiting 18 years for. And so, as you can imagine, I can see a path where, one, you serve the community for decades, but also, and so I guess if you do that and you do a 90% reduction of it, it's worth $1.6 million after you've done it. And so that's a $14.4 million loss to the San Gabriel Cemetery, if you wanted to quantify it.
Thank you.
Yep. Should I stick around, or is that? No.
Had all of my notes, and then just with the information that we've gotten. I guess the question I have next really is maybe something Sam and Jen can answer. Because as we're determining eligibility, and should we determine eligibility, I guess my question is that by consequence, then negate the project? Or is that where the certificate of occupancy comes in?
Thank you, Chair Lubsich, for the question. No, it doesn't. It requires a certain process for the project to go through, is all. And to my knowledge, the project team has already fulfilled the requirements of preparing the work that would be needed for the project to go through that path. Sam, you can clarify if I'm wrong, but they have prepared the EIR, and because it's been presented together here in one case report, I believe that we could pass to that review, and then the recommendations of the commission would be forwarded to the city council for final action. So no, it does not preclude the project. Eligibility does not preclude the project, if that's the question.
I guess another question that I have, and again, this may be something that can be answered on the dais. I hear what the project team is saying about a sacred space, blocking tractor access just in the actual development of any project on the site. But were the structure to remain and be designated, my understanding is we don't have any requirements that it would be available to the public rather than the exterior view. As property owners, they would maintain control of that space. And so we would be designating something that would afford an external view, but not necessarily an interior appreciation of the features that Ms. Gonzalez spoke to?
Well, I suppose we'd be speculating there because we don't have a project before us that would give us information as to how the property might be used if the house were retained, or even if the property would be retained by the project applicant. But let's assume it would just stay in the condition it is now, then it would be as accessible to the public as it is now, I suppose. So I'm not sure if the applicant would like to speak to that, but that's not the project before us, so I'm not sure.
I only asked that because there had been a mention in one of the reports that it could be a living quarters for a groundskeeper or something, and so that was how I was understanding a retention. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, I think you can probably see, we have a caretaker house. I think can you flip to that slide? It was built in 1888, I believe, and we moved it across the cemetery to its present location in 1923. So we have maintained it for 131 years. It is where our manager, Todd Sexton, and his family lives today. And so we wouldn't have a practical use for a house located in the middle of burial space.
All right, thank you. With those answers, I will go ahead and close public comment at 8:11. Having a hard time seeing the clock tonight. So then, we have before us decisions, and a vote to make in terms of adopting the resolutions.
And yes, Madam Chair, as the commission moves into deliberation, staff would like to read into the record comments provided by Vice Chair Maharo. Although she is absent, she did want to enter this into the record. And it reads the following: Dear Planning Manager, City Staff, and fellow commissioners, thank you for the comprehensive environmental impact report for 607 West Roses Road. The commitment to preserving the historic integrity of our city is greatly appreciated. I have taken my decision very seriously and have visited the site multiple times. My recommendation to the City Council is the result of reading the detailed report, visiting the location, and engaging with the neighbors. San Gabriel's rich historical heritage is something we all value deeply, and it is crucial to protect buildings that contribute significantly to our history. This principle has led me to a complex decision that I believe is in the best interest of the city of San Gabriel Cemetery, and the local community. After careful consideration, I have concluded that the structure at 607 West Roses Road does not meet the criteria for significant historical contributions to the city. It's set back from the street, and unattended landscape render it largely invisible to pedestrians and motorists. The current state of the property is a result of many years of neglect. In light of these factors, I believe the San Gabriel Cemetery expansion would offer consistent upkeep of this property, which is currently lacking. The cemetery, already recognized as historic, continues to provide an essential service to our community. The proposed expansion is critical to accommodate future interments, ensuring that the cemetery can contribute to serve the community's needs. Therefore, after careful and thorough consideration, my recommendation to the City Council is to permit the expansion of the San Gabriel Cemetery. Thank you once again for the hard work and dedication. And this ends the letter.
Thank you. So moving into deliberation, are there other comments? I'll start with Commissioner DeBrent.
I guess just to kind of close, is that what we're taught? Final comments, okay. I don't make these decisions lightly. I feel being part of this commission, we're tasked with, preserving what is here in the city, and to kind of be that group that when projects like this come up, that we are looking at these, looking at the facts, and we are doing what's in the best interest of the city in general, and not particularly one item or one building, for instance, that, as one of the commenters made, that it's not going to be there for public consumption to see and to enjoy, and all of the, it's going to be a private ownership, and I understand there are two sides to that. It's still part of the integrity of the city. But I don't feel that this is I appreciate all the architectural design. I appreciate all of that. I just don't feel, if this was going to be developed into 4 or 5 units on this property, which could very well happen because of the size of a developer could come in and buy that and do that, that would have significant impacts to the neighborhood. I feel that if this was a McMansion being built there, that was outside of, that's a different level of consideration. But what is happening here, and this is reasonable to the community, and it's an expansion of something that is already historical and will be here for many generations to enjoy, I feel, as well. So I particularly walk through that cemetery all the time, and I'm always amazed at looking at the markers and to see those monuments, historical monuments of people who have gone before us. And cemeteries have such a huge part of our history, whether it's the Normandy cemeteries or whether it's Gettysburg. We walk in there and we look, and there are moments in there that we realize where we've been, what we did to get there, and the sacrifices that were lost in some cases, and what people contributed to the community at large. And so, looking at all of this and looking at all of the documentation that's here, and like I said, it is not lost on me the work that's gone into this and and what we could lose as far as architectural designs and the importance of that. I feel like what is being replaced by that is going to benefit the community and the neighborhood in the future much more than having this as a designated historical landmark in the city. So that's my opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner DeVrent. Commissioner Weeks?
Well, again, it's kind of heartbreaking for me as an architect who has studied a lot of old architecture and architects and how they've developed styles and that sort of thing. I hate to see this lost, but on the other hand, I think in the long run, and what really is needed for the community, I think, is the expansion of the cemetery. I'm not as colorful as Commissioner DeVrent, but it's a very difficult call for me. But I hate to see this. I hate to see this lost. But I think the right direction is to go with the cemetery expansion. Thank you.
Commissioner Reyna?
Yeah, there's compelling cases on both sides of this, and I'm still sitting here kind of not knowing what side of the fence I'm really gonna sway on this. I mean, I do understand and appreciate, the historical relevance of it. What little there is, or that was reported here, but I totally understand the permitting of the expansion. I mean, it's just hard to sit here and try to outweigh historical relevance on two properties that I don't know. I feel like I'm doing a disservice by just picking one over the other, considering that I've learned a lot just being on this commission. I'm not an architect. I don't have, that kind of experience, but being here these years has really given me a perspective and an appreciation that I never had before. So I don't know. It's a little, I wouldn't say emotional, but I'm really kind of, I really have to process this a little bit better. So that's all I got to say.
Thank you. So before us, the recommendation from staff is approving a resolution of the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission of the City of San Gabriel, California, to adopt a resolution recommending that the City Council certify the Environment Impact Report, adopt findings of fact and mitigation monitoring and reporting program, but then go and deny the planning case, which I'm reading denies the project
It would be a recommendation.
on to Planning Commission and,
Right, it would be a recommendation that then the commission is deciding that there is eligibility potential, and then therefore not move forward with the demolition.
and if we were to decide that there is eligibility, but that we would rather see Hab's hair done, a plaque placed, how is that captured here?
Yeah, I'd have to comb through the resolution myself really on that. But so if there is eligibility, then this commission has purview over reviewing the project and making recommendations to city council. If there is not eligibility, then this commission does not have purview over the project, and we are done with with the project tonight. So if you do find eligibility, then we continue to talk about the project, and then we should review, excuse me, those other questions that came up more in depth, maybe with the alternatives, and what exactly is the recommended resolution, and what type of recommendations the commission would want to forward to City Council.
So to me, I feel that bears sort of a first discussion. I guess I'm a little confused in the resolution because I feel like it's capturing both of those, that we are talking about the project and eligibility, whereas really our task is to separate one from the other. And so that's, again, sort of where I'm trying to hold two things in my head at the same time. In what I'm hearing from my colleagues, I'm hearing value, perhaps, but not eligibility in terms of the property.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I think that was you were asking a question to your fellow commissioners here, and I'm so sorry. I just wanted to clarify, and I hope Sam can do better than I can, but I believe the recommendation to adopt the resolution would be only if, that would be the recommendation of staff were you to move forward with review of the project, and that would be because you were to concur with the findings of eligibility. Is that correct, Sam?
If the commission decides to reverse the recommendation and it's a recommendation to support, then staff would have to summarize the comments that are provided this evening, or the commission can also provide staff with the exact verbiage. The findings that are made this evening would be updated in the resolution, as well as the recommendation that will be moved forward to the City Council.
Okay. So the findings of fact that we have in the current printed resolution then would need to be amended to reflect our decision. All right. So I'm looking at those. We are, as written in the resolution, accepting the EIR, we are accepting the MMRP, but then we are denying the project on the basis of the 4 facts listed below. General plan amendment will allow the project site to be consistent with the general plan use and other applicable general plan goals. The zone change will allow the project site to be consistent with the general plan land use and other applicable general plan goals. The development will conform to all applicable development standards of the zoning code with the application of an open space public facility zone. A historic resource evaluation report was prepared for the purposes of compliance with CEQA and found that the residence is eligible for listing on the California Register of Historical Resources and as a City of San Gabriel landmark, and should therefore be considered historical resource as defined by CEQA. And the adaptive reuse and restoration of the existing residence will allow for the existing residence to be repurposed and maintained and would provide some internment space or space for the columbarium. So it seems to me that the last 2 points are the ones, if we do not agree with the resolution as written, that then need to be altered so that staff has direction in terms of the finding of fact to forward on.
Yes, and whatever language that is provided the commission can take action based off of what can be summarized this evening, or then the revised resolution will be brought back to this commission for final proofing, and then that gets forward. So it would result in a special meeting with enough members for a quorum to approve the updated findings.
I think my preference, and I'll weigh in with my fellow commissioners, is that if we could provide a summary so that the project applicant doesn't have to keep returning and waiting on the process, that would be my preference, something that we could provide in summary that would be forwarded on, rather than returning for another meeting once that language is set in the resolution. So I would welcome proposals from my fellow commissioners about what the findings of fact would be that reflect your positions on this. In terms of the third finding of fact, and I guess this may be where, as we kind of go down the dais, maybe we're a little less confident, but I would very much, as the project applicant said, like a plaque. I would like something that describes the building, and to me that happens if you see it as eligible, and not as something that is ineligible. And that's where I'm stuck with this. If it's to be demolished, I would like the work to be preserved in some form, and I feel that a plaque, and I'm using the acronym of the HABS-HAIR, which is typically what's prepared when a building is not extant anymore. It provides a very thorough record, which, if I understood from earlier comments, that has been satisfied by the work that's been done here.
Yes, this property has been extensively studied to the credit of the applicant team. And so it's really considered HABS-like in this case. And so the historic documentation is considered complete. What would be missing, although there is a lot of photographs, a real dedicated photographic program would be a part of, supplementing that current documentation. And that's just digitally, so that's why we say HABS-like. And it wouldn't require the full level. This isn't a National Register eligible property, and so digital quality is certainly sufficient. And so then together, that would provide enough documentation to satisfy that mitigation measure, and then that would be curated here locally and offered for curation with the Los Angeles Public Library System as well, because certainly Ivan Wells is probably much more known on the wider scale in terms of LA County. And then, yes, and then the plaque was part of the mitigations recommended by the EIR study.
I think that's my recommendation is the documenting of it, the preserving of the documentation for this, and it's sort of some kind of a plaque that is on the property that designates the importance of this would be sufficient for me. And I guess my question is that, and I think I'm getting hung up on saying that this is eligible with these, but these two mitigation procedures these two mitigations are taking place. Does that meet our standard for this resolution, I guess is the question. So if we say it's eligible, the applicants are going to have to go through another year process of what we're doing here, right?
My understanding is and again, maybe we're both sort of in that space of, and again, this is the first, I think, really big project that we've had to encounter as a commission. Having the Historic Resources Evaluation Report, along with the other documentation contained within the EIR CEQA, it sounds to me as though much of the work that we would be asking them to do, and HABS is Historic Architectural Building Survey, they have already done that work, so it wouldn't be sending them out to redo any of the reporting that has already been done. What then we would be recommending, and please correct me if I'm wrong, would be that going forward from today, that work would be done to prepare a plaque something, and again, the more digital record that then would be filed and kept. And so it sounds to me as though they would be moving content they already have created into that document. Am I right in that?
Essentially, yes, so just what is left is the photo documentation, so that could be done as the project were to move forward in the review process. And then the plaque would be developed along with staff review and prepared. And then, of course, the applicant would work with staff to, get the proper wording and the proper sizing and the proper placement, et cetera. And then I just want to kind of go back to the point that I don't believe that any of that falls under the purview of the commission if there isn't eligibility. So I mean, because the commission doesn't oversee properties that aren't on the inventory or designated. So, right. So if you'd like those recommendations to move forward, then that does come along with accepting the EIR findings that there's eligibility and that this is a historical resource under CEQA. Sam, I'm not sure if there's more to add there.
So then based on that, the third finding of fact could remain as written, that we are recognizing that it's eligible, but then it would be the fourth, rather than adaptive reuse and restoration, we would be asking them to complete the HAP's hair and provide.
Yes, so the third finding of fact would stand if the commission determined that there was eligibility. And let me just quickly read this fourth one here. Well, I think that you would need to look at the heading of this section 3, because this recommends denial, so that hasn't been, determined, I think, by vote from the commission. So I think if the recommendation of denial were to move forward, then it seems that this is appropriate. And then if that wasn't the recommendation of the commission, then that would need to be reworded.
I'm sorry, I was operating just based on the discussion that it was going to be recommending approval of project, and so we needed to bring the finding of fact into alignment with that recommendation. So Sam, in terms of process, would it clarify our steps forward? I think our agenda is written that we are voting on adoption of the resolution, but should there be a vote on, are we approving, denying? Because again, I feel like we're making a recommendation on to.
So the recommendation would be for staff to amend the resolution to recommend approval or to move the project forward, and then the findings that are provided this evening, that would be reversed from the findings that are provided in the current resolution.
All right.
So by moving the project forward, we're talking about the proposed demolition of the project with these two mitigation components applied.
But yes.
All right, so then I guess I would ask for a motion that would reflect the change to the resolution. That if we are not adopting the resolution as written, I would need a motion that would include the language that we wish to have in place of what is provided to us.
Yes, it would be to amend the recommendation to approve and move the project forward based on the findings that are provided this evening.
Do I have that motion? Or a motion to adopt the resolution as written, either way?
Motion to adopt with the changes, and to approve the project moving forward with our recommendations.
All right, so a second to approve the resolution with the amendment of section 3, recommending approval of the project.
And before the commission takes action, again, this is determining that the project does not have eligibility potential. Or I don't know if Jen,
Well, Section 3 that does include approving the EIR, which includes the HRER, identifying the property as a historical resource under CEQA, does acknowledge eligibility of the property and does recommend approval of the mitigation measures that have been recommended in the EIR. So I think that the resolution would be best revised to reflect the commission's feelings of the project being something worthwhile for the city, something the city could benefit from, all the things that were discussed. Now, I don't want to put words in the commission's mouth, but the sentiments that were discussed in favor of the project and recommend to the city council that they have a basis for accepting a statement of overriding considerations.
that is correct, yes. And that would be included as part of what gets forward. It would be that statement of overriding consideration based on those findings, yes.
Okay, so then that would effectively become the fourth finding of fact, that we are making a statement of overriding considerations regarding the project. All right. And that's city council who makes that decision. We're just making the recommendation on, okay. So with that, we have the motion to recommend amending the resolution for approval of the project, removing the fourth bullet point and making a recommendation to override that would be then taken on by the city council. All right, so if we could have a roll call vote.
Commissioner DeVrent,
Aye.
Commissioner Weeks,
Aye.
Chair Lubacek,
Aye.
Commissioner Urena.
Aye.
Motion passes 4 ayes.
All right. I appreciate the discussion and learned a lot. Staff items is next on our agenda.
The only staff item for this evening would be to mention the Cultural Fest happening this Thursday between 5 and 9 p.m. In the Mission District. That's it.
Then the next item on our agenda are commissioner comments, conference meetings, and reports. Each commissioner may address the commission on matters of general information and/or concern. This is also the time for commissioners to report on conferences and/or meetings that they have attended. I'll start with Commissioner DeVrent.
I have nothing at this time.
Commissioner Weeks. Commissioner Urena.
Nothing to report.
It's been a busy back end of the semester. I did not get to attend the San Gabriel Historical Association's last meeting. They had a member of the Gabrielino tribe speak about the history of San Gabriel, but I would encourage all commissioners to keep an eye out on their events. I'm expecting that they will have their annual gala and fundraiser in August, as they typically do. But it's a really important association, I think, to support, and it's also a wealth of knowledge for all of us. So that was sort of my call out for the Historical Association. And with that, it'll bring us to adjourning our Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission meeting to the special meeting of the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission on September 11th.
Oh, it's a regular meeting.
Regular meeting. Okay.
Unless there is a special meeting.
So our regular meeting in September 11th at 6:30 p.m. at City Hall here in Council Chambers.